Welcome to the entire plot of the Tandem Read, Part 11, where we're going through everything that happens in Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn from Throne of Glass in chronological order. Now, in today's episode, we're only going to be reading Empire of Storms chapters, and we're going to specifically be reading Empire of Storms chapters 34 through 41. We are primarily going to be sticking with Aelin's POV in this specific part because it is time to battle with a Valg fleet. I would even argue this is our first, real battle in this whole war. I know obviously the witches invaded Aderlin, but that was more of an attack on Dorian specifically and to send a message. This is a direct attack on Aelin. So, chapter 34, Aelin has officially secured, arguably, her alliance with the Mycenaeans. However, Rolf did say she has to get them through this battle for them to be official allies. So they're allies for this battle. If they win this battle, they'll be allies for the war. So there's a good bit of pressure there. But her primary goal in this upcoming battle, because she did kind of start it with her little lovely magic beacon that she sent out, is that she wants to send a message, not only to Erewhon of what her power is capable of, but she wants to send a message to potential allies to say, see how I protected the Mycenaeans at Skull Bay? This is how I can protect my other allies. So she's hoping to kind of get two birds with one stone in this. So now this is where things get fun and interesting. Aelin turns to Lysandra to confirm that Lysandra is still good with the game plan, to which Lysandra is like, absolutely, I'm totally ready. No one, not even us, has been privy to what in the world this game plan is. We didn't even know there was a game plan. We thought this was a spur of the moment thing. So this tells us that maybe this has been in the works for a little longer than we thought. So Aelin, Lysandra, Rowan, Fenris, and Gabriel go out into the Sea Dragon, and they start going out to meet the Valg fleet. While they are doing that, they are using the iron chains to wrap around the mast of the ship, but then also to wrap around Aelin. Remember, Fae use iron to help tether their magic, so this kind of tells us that Aelin is going to be using a ton of her magic, so much that she needs the iron chains to help tether her. And long story short, this basically is just going to keep Aelin from, I use the term overdosing on her magic, but the thing that we should really focus is not depleting her magic to the point where she could lose her life. So that is an indication that, yes, this is about to be an insane amount of power that she's going to use. As for Dorian and Aedion, they have their own place in this battle, mostly because she wants to keep Dorian out of harm's way. But there's also a harpoon on top of this watchtower that Aedion is supposed to be using. Now, I do not really understand medieval war weapons, but the best way that I can describe it that will hopefully help you visualize it is, think of it as like a crossbow, but it's gigantic. And it's on top of a watchtower. So she sees that Dorian and Aedion have made it on top of the watchtower to their harpoon, and she decides that it is time to get things going. So Rowan starts using his wind magic to propel the Sea Dragon as fast as they can up to this Valg fleet to meet them in the ocean. Aelin also turns to Lysandra and gives her the go-ahead, and Lysandra jumps off the boat into the water. So naturally everyone's very curious and starts looking over the ledge to see why Lysandra jumped into the water when they notice that she is shifting. And she's not just shifting into any sort of, sea creature to help with this war. She is changing into the legendary mythological Mycenaean sea dragon. So this is crazy for a couple reasons. One, it just shows Lysandra's power as a shifter. We actually don't talk about this till much later in Tower of Dawn, but I think it's a useful piece of information for you to have now. We will learn through Falcon, the other shifter, that shifters can only change into bigger and greater beasts based on how much power they have. So this is also a really big flex to be like, oh, Lysandra is that shifter. Like she can shift into things that shifters wish that they could be. So she's a very powerful shifter, for one. For two, like we briefly talked about at the beginning of this book, the Mycenaeans have a legend, if you will, where the Mycenaeans will only return when the Mycenaean sea dragon is spotted. Like when the Mycenaean sea dragon returns is when the Mycenaeans will return. So Aelin did not want to sit around and wait for that prophecy to be filled, so she decided that she was going to fulfill that prophecy herself using Lysandra. And this immediately has an effect on all the Mycenaeans that have been in hiding at Skulls Bay. They see this as a fulfillment of a prophecy that they have all lived by and have heard about and have dreamed about through generations. This is also very helpful because we learn that there are two sea wyverns, but they're like Valg sea wyverns. Okay, so these are creations of Erewhon. They're like the wyverns that Manon and her 13 fly, but they are meant to go underwater. So they're like Valg sea dragons, if you will. And there's 2 of those. So Lysandra can handle those, and Aelin only has to worry about all of the ships. So let's jump to Aedion and Dorian's POV, because they are on top of this watchtower and they see a Mycenaean sea dragon. And Aedion recognizes immediately that this was the Mycenaean sea dragon that was carved into the temple walls. Do you remember? I told you guys this was so important. You should pay attention. This is like one of my fun favorite little tidbits that I only recognized the second time I read the book. But after Aelin liberates the temple in Ilium, right? She goes into the temple, she purifies it with fire, and then we can see a bunch of carvings on the wall. One of them is the legendary Mycenaean sea dragon. Then there was the whole thing where Aelin and Aedion were talking to the ghost of Brannon, and the whole time we were like, where's Lysandra? Even Aedion had a moment of like, where's Lysandra? We learned that Aelin actually had Lysandra study the sea dragon carvings in the temple walls so that she could become the creature, because she has to have a thorough understanding of the creature in order to become it, right? So Lysandra was studying the sea dragon. Now let's think of the implications of this. That was a long time ago. That was like back at like plan B, plan C. We're now at plan like W, okay? So the fact that Aelin has been planning this since then, like she knew that she would want to fulfill this prophecy. She knew before she even got to Skull's Bay, she had an inkling based off of things that she learned in Assassin's Blade years ago when she was 16 and she met Rolf. She already had an inkling that he was potentially the heir of the Mycenaean people. So this just goes to show not only how intelligent she is, but how much thought and attention to detail she is putting in every step of this process. So Aedion is realizing all of this, and it says terror flooded his veins when he realized that the battle's outcome is largely going to depend on Lysandra. Empire of Storms chapter 35, we're officially out in the middle of the ocean. We're getting closer and closer to the Valg fleet, and Aelin notices that her amulet is humming as they get closer and closer to the Valg. Remember, in her amulet is one of the word keys. So it makes sense that the word key is kind of responding to all of this Valg power being so close by. So they let Rolf know the plan. Basically, Rowan's going to use his wind magic to get the ship as close and as quickly as possible. Then she wants Rolf to swing the ship onto its side so that the side Aelin is on faces this fleet, and she is basically going to unleash fire magic. This will require a lot from Aelin, okay? And she really cannot afford to empty her battery, but luckily for her, she's with her Karanom. So let's jump back to a lot of things that we learned in Air of Fire. We talked about this battery analogy where if your battery gets to 0, you're gone. But we also talked about the well analogy, which is mostly the wording that Sarah J. Maas uses. I just use the battery analogy because I feel like it's easier to summarize to you guys. Aelin can use small spurts of magic at the top of her battery. Like she can pull juice from the top of her battery with little spurts of magic. But if she dives deep, Sarah J. Maas uses the word plunges a lot. If she plunges into her well, right, she goes to the bottom of this battery and she pulls from that battery juice at the bottom of the battery, that's where a lot of that really powerful magic is going to come from, and it's going to be way more effective, way more powerful, way more intense if she does it that way. Also, though, it can be a little dangerous because she has to go all the way to the floor of her battery. Now, where Rowan comes in as her Karanom is he's basically, think of it as like their magic is soulmates in a way. It basically means magic really coincides with each other. They're like fitting puzzle pieces, and you only have one other Karanom, and this person kind of is like a battery that enhances your battery, right? So you'll see in this moment, Rowan is going to cut open his palm and Aelin is going to cut open hers, and they're going to hold hands, and that almost like extends Aelin's battery. Like it puts their battery lives together so Aelin can use not only all of her battery, or hopefully not all of it because we want her to be around for a while, but she's also going to be tapping into Rowan's battery as well, making her power almost doubly as powerful. So not only is it more powerful, but it's also safer for her to do it this way. So they're holding hands and she starts to dive deep into her power because they are getting pretty close to the Valg fleet. This is also where we learned through Aelin's inner monologue, because mind you, there's a lot of pressure on her right now. Also, your magic matures with you. So we're very interested to see what her magic's going to look like. But she has been slowly plunging down into the depths of her battery, okay, over the last 3 days. And we basically learned that she got to the bottom of her battery. So she's like ready to go, but then she links with Rowan, and then her, the floor of her battery gets a little deeper. So she decides to go down even deeper in this moment. So they get as close as they can. Rolf turns to the side and Aelin unleashes her magic. Obviously, if you can imagine, it's the most insane form of magic we've seen from her yet. It is the most powerful form of her magic that we have seen. Although Rowan has never been terrified of her power per se, he's even in awe of like what she's able to do in this moment. The pillar of flame began expanding, laced now with blue and turquoise, flame that could melt bone, crack the earth. Too much. He, Rowan, had given her too much, and she had delved too deep into her power. And this is when Rowan realizes, because he's like, what could have possibly gone wrong? I mean, it's kind of going right, because obviously, like, the more power, the better, technically, chances of us winning this battle. However, he's getting a little bit nervous for Aelin's well-being because of the extent of the power being shown right now. That is when Rowan realizes Aelin is wearing the word key in her amulet. So before, we just kind of saw it as like, oh, it's responding to the Valg. No, it was responding to Aelin's power. She is unintentionally using the word key to amplify her power right now. At this moment, Rowan also realizes that Aelin's in a sort of trance, like she's not really herself, and despite his best efforts, he cannot snap her out of it. It says, but Rowan felt it then, felt that bottom of her power crack open as if the beast within that word key stomped its foot. Ash-encrusted rock crumbled away beneath it and revealed a roiling molten core of magic beneath it. So basically, she not only got to the bottom of her battery, but then she got access to Rowan's. She even got to the bottom of that. And then the word key, using its magic, basically stomped, right, and crushed the bottom of that battery even, and it basically opened up to an endless pit of power that Aelin can tap into. It's exciting, but it's also terrifying at the same time. As if it were the fiery heart of Mala herself, Aelin plunged into that power, bathed in it. This is when Rowan rips his hand from Aelin's, and she wakes up from her trance. However, it's not exactly Aelin who wakes up from this trance. It's her body, yes, but her eyes and her mind are not her. Her gold eyes turn to silver in this moment. It says a faint smile blossomed on her full mouth, born of cruelty and arrogance, and she examined the iron chains wrapped around her wrist. The iron melted away, molten ore sizzling through the wooden deck and into the dark below. So that tells us that whatever is in Aelin's body right now is not Fae. The creature that stared through Aelin's eyes furled her fingers into a fist. Light leaked through her clenched fingers, cold white light. Tendrils flickered. Silver flame. I'm not going to say anything, but I think y'all have heard the phrase silver flame before from Sarah J. Maas. Nothing confirmed, but definitely something to think about. So Gavriel in this moment yells for everyone on the ship to close their eyes and look away because the light is so bright that he's afraid it's going to blind the entire crew. But Rowan looks right at Aelin. Some primal intrinsic part of him knew that it was Deanna taking over Aelin's body. Now, we'll talk about the implications of that in a hot second, but Deanna in Aelin's body looks to Rowan and says, now this is very important, so please lock in here for every single word. Every key has a lock. Tell the queen who was promised to retrieve it soon, for all the allies in the world shall make no difference if she does not wield the lock, if she does not put those keys back with it. Tell her flame and iron bound together merge into silver to learn that much can be found. A mere step is all it shall take. Okay. Tell her flame and iron bound together merge into silver to learn that much can be found. A mere step is all it shall take. I cannot stress enough how important that is, but I can't really tell you why it's important for like a hot minute and a couple of parts. So we will come back to this. We won't understand the full extent of this for a while. This is also when Rowan realizes that the silver flame is not Aelin's wildfire, but in fact it is Deanna's moonfire. Very interesting. We have not heard of moonfire yet. So now let's jump back to Aelin's POV because she's actually very aware that Deanna has taken over her body and she actually heard the whole warning issued to Rowan in this moment. Aelin also in this moment realizes about the word key attached to the amulet and how that is most likely why her power went out of control, and that is how Deanna got access to her body. So very creepy, but Aelin has to watch. No control whatsoever. As Deanna sees the Valg fleet in front of her and is about to like re-unleash this fire magic, but it's like moonfire instead of wildfire now. But then she notices the island behind her and decides that it's so full of life, and that would be a far more powerful conquest. So Deanna turns around to aim at Skulls Bay. And Aelin has to watch in horror as Rowan jumps in front of Deanna's hand right as she's about to release this fire. Basically, Rowan is going to jump in front of the entirety of Skulls Bay and sacrifice himself. And that is the only thing that actually makes Aelin snap out of it. However, she doesn't have enough time to fully turn her body back to the Valg fleet before the magic releases. So she just kind of like shoots her arm off to the side and down. Let's just say she gets a little bit of Skulls Bay, a large chunk of the ship that they are currently standing on, and then like the side of the Valg fleet. Chapter 36. Aelin is in shock, not only from her magic trance that she was just kind of stuck in, or having her body hacked by Deanna, or even from harming her own allies, but now she's also processing the fact that Deanna referred to as the queen who was promised, so that doesn't sound good. Like, promised to who, you know? And for what? Aelin knows that she's somehow going to make Deanna pay for this. However, she needs to act like a queen and win this battle because she has a hefty list of goals that she has for the outcome of this battle. So she's going to deal with the consequences of everything else later. Right now, she needs to deal with the fact that she is in the water. When she bursted the ship into a bajillion pieces, the ship went down. They're all in the water. Now, this is actually where we're going to learn a little bit more about Fenris. This is also a very cool thing to hear if you're a big ACOTAR fan. This isn't a spoiler if you haven't read ACOTAR. If anything, just like keep this in mind if you do plan to read ACOTAR, which you definitely should if you haven't already after you're done reading Throne of Glass. But we learn that Fenris has a very unique ability that we have not heard from yet in the Throne of Glass world, where he can, in the blink of an eye, flash from place to place. Think of it as like apparating from Harry Potter. Or if you have read ACOTAR, this is winnowing. Okay, so we learn that Fenris can winnow short distances. So he's using this transporting ability. They don't call it winnowing in Throne of Glass. It's kind of a weird thing that only really Fenris can do. So he does his best to transfer as many of the crew as he can to the reef using his little flashing back and forth ability. And basically, eventually they all get to the reef to kind of reassess the situation. And thankfully, we can see that Aelin, from the beginning, and then also getting the side after that whole incident with Deanna, she has actually gotten majority of the Valg fleet, but there are still 3 ships left, and of course the 2 Valg sea dragons. But Aelin's powers are depleted at this moment. She can't even spark a flame if she wanted to. And unfortunately, because she drained a lot of Rowan's magic as well, Rowan doesn't really have much magic to work with either. Not to mention, Fenris just transported all of those people, and so now he also has no powers, really. So all of our Fae have lost their power, and then the sailors that were on the ship now don't have a ship to be on, so they're just kind of sailors sitting on a reef, and they don't really know how to fight from a reef. They know how to fight from a ship, so we're kind of stuck, which makes us realize that all of this now is going to fall on Lysandra. So let's jump to Lysandra's POV. So she can tell that something had gone wrong, even from under the water, when she saw the ship get blown apart that Aelin and her crew were on, and let's just say a lot of the crew did not make it. A lot of them fell into the water and in the debris didn't make it, or they did drowned, or they hit their head. You know, this kind of, like I said, these books start to get a little dark, okay? Please don't demonetize me. If you want the summaries of this book, you're going into this with the mindset that you're reading a darker series, okay? So please don't demonetize me because you can't handle the source material. That's like my biggest fear right now. We do learn that Lysandra did save 2 of the sailors' lives. One of them actually ended up being Rolf, and then just another crew member. But unfortunately, there were not a lot of other survivors. While Lysandra is dropping Rolf and his crew member off at the reef, she notices that the 2 Valg sea dragons are taking advantage now of the free lunch. Okay, all of the crew members that did not make it are now just in the water for the taking. So these Valg creatures are feasting on the crew members that didn't make it after the shipwreck. Lysandra takes this as like I'm going to take this opportunity to go take down one of the ships. So she takes advantage of this distraction. She goes to one of the ships and she just starts like beating up the belly of this ship with her body. So that's kind of the tactic she's using to get these ships down. Basically, she's trying to make them capsize. She does successfully get the first one to capsize, but the two wyverns do hear her and naturally start chasing after her. These Valg wyverns are twice her size, we learn, but we also learn that she is faster, so she decides that she is going to swim deeper out into the ocean. They're chasing her all the way out there. She does get one of them alone, and she unalives it. Guys, when it comes to these action scenes, I do really try to just summarize them. Otherwise, we'd be here forever if I gave you a play-by-play. But she takes down one of the wyverns. She's looking for the other wyvern, and she realizes it's swimming towards the reef. Now, because Lysandra originally swam out deeper, the way it works, and this confused me the first time, but the way it works is, so it's like, think Aelin's here, okay? Aelin and her crew, they're on the reef here. The shore is even further out there, okay? But they're on the reef here. The Valg ships are here. Lysandra swam from here, and she got him out to here. She kills the wyvern over here. She sees the second one kind of started to head back towards the reef area, so she races it back, and she gets to it right about at the bottom of the Valg ships. Oh, that was a good explanation. I like that. She ends up body slamming this wyvern into the body of the second of the three ships that are up, and in doing so, not only damages the ship, but also kills the wyvern. So now both of the wyverns are gone, and there's just one more ship. So Lysandra is killing it. She's doing an amazing job. However, we can tell that she's really tired, not only from shifting into such a big creature, but she's also expending a lot of energy in this creature form. So she's going through a lot. And obviously, I'm summarizing it, and she's doing really well, but of course, like, she's got a lot of bumps and scratches and bruises, and she's taken some bites. Like, she's not doing amazingly. But all she has to damage now is that last ship. So she's like, oh, I can definitely do this. And then, for goodness sakes, I'm gonna, like, sleep for a couple days because I'm dead tired. Lysandra decides to break the surface for one big gulp of air before she goes to attack the last ship, but when she comes up for air, she hears Aelin screaming, and she's screaming at Lysandra to swim away. This is when Lysandra sees three, not two, three massive Valg sea wyverns swimming in her direction. This is also where we learn that these are the mamas. Yes, in fact, the two sea wyverns that were twice her size, that she took care of, got rid of, they were babies. They were like teens. They were adolescent little Valg creatures. Now she has to deal with three very angry mamas. Chapter 37, Aedion's POV, is he's witnessing all of the chaos, and he's been holding his breath this whole time, but now that he's seeing the three adult wyverns coming for Lysandra, he is absolutely losing his mind. Dorian, however, steps forward and has a great idea, and he signals with his magic for Lysandra to swim in his direction. There's really no good way to describe Dorian's magic. I think it's really just up to your imagination, which is another thing that I think is going to look really weird whenever we get this into a TV show or movie to see like how that's actually depicted on screen. It works great in my imagination, but when I try to actually describe it, it sounds really weird and odd. But he's got a big magic light up hand, I guess, like a giant foam finger up in the air, telling Lysandra to swim over to him. And Lysandra actually swims directly towards the three sea wyverns. So she is ignoring Dorian's help and direction, for now at least. Now this next part, I hate to read it, but it's huge for Aedion's character arc. This is the beginning, in my opinion, like the true actual beginning of the emotional and psychological journey that we're going to see Aedion go on for the rest of the series. So, be ready to get uncomfortable with me. For the first time, he hated his cousin. He hated Aelin for asking this of Lysandra, both to defend them and to secure the Mycenaeans to fight for Terrasen. Hated the people who left such scars on the shifter that Lysandra was so willing to throw her life away. Hated himself for being stuck in this useless tower with a war machine, the harpoon, only capable of firing one shot at a time. I'll let you sit with that. There's not much I can really add to that for now, but I want you to kind of remember this moment and where Aedion is in this moment in the future, when certain things that Aedion do might feel random, might feel out of character, because they have been out of character up until this point. However, we get in his inner monologue right here that there is a shift and a change in him. So Lysandra gets really close to these adult sea I can't say wyverns. So Lysandra gets really close to these three adult wyverns and then like fakes them out and goes straight for the ship. It has a bunch of archers on it, so they're all hitting her with bows, and they're like actually lodging in her body, but she has to keep going, so she's like bleeding everywhere. It's like really gory, really intense, and you feel bad because Lysandra was already dead tired before, and this is just like what she went through before on steroids. So she's purely just running on adrenaline right now. But she basically gets to the ship, she's doing her best to destroy it, and she kind of does like a bunch of these like maneuvery tricks to get the other sea wyverns to also kind of like fly into the sides of the ship. And actually, they beat up the bottom of the ship so badly. So these Valg wyverns aren't very smart, okay? They're really just all brutality. They're really all body. They're just creatures who don't have much of a brain. So they are like destroying their own ship on accident. It's kind of funny. And one of them even like flies into a part of the ship that has so much debris hanging off of it that it actually like harms itself and it dies. So now there's only 2 to worry about. Then Lysandra, when she only has 2 wyverns to worry about because the ship is definitely down for good and that 3rd wyvern is gone for good, she decides to book it towards Dorian where he signaled her to go. So there's 2 wyverns on her tail. She's barely outpacing them because they're way faster than the adolescent ones were, clearly. When she gets close enough to Dorian that he freezes one of them with ice. Then there's a catapult on shore that some of Rolf's men were using, and they use the catapult to hit this now frozen wyvern, and it shatters like glass. So now there's only 1 to worry about. And basically it's described as the dance of death between Lysandra and this other wyvern. They're trying to like outswim each other. They're trying to fake each other out. It's this whole thing. Lysandra is getting way too close to not making it. But she swims as close as she humanly possibly can to the shore when Aedion pulls out the harpoon, and he only has 1 shot, but thankfully he does make it and he does get the final wyvern. Lysandra gets to shore and Aedion runs to shore to see her there, and basically she just collapsed. Like she used every last bit of her energy just to get on the shore and rest. Aelin and everyone else has now swum to the reef to check on Lysandra and see her, but Aedion is talking to Lysandra in this moment in her beast form because she is so drained from her magic usage that she can't even shift back into her human form. So she's kind of stuck in this Mycenaean sea dragon form until she rests enough. So she's literally gonna just have to take a nap on the beach as a sea dragon. At this point, they're just trying to keep her awake to make sure that she's all good as people are tending to the wounds from the arrows. And Aedion says, the useless sentries in the watchtower are now all half in love with you. One said he wanted to marry you, but you know what I told them? I said that they didn't stand a chance, because I'm going to marry you. One day, I'm going to marry you. I'll be generous and let you pick when, even if it's 10 years from now or 20, but one day you are going to be my wife. Princess Lysandra Ashriver sounds nice, doesn't it? And Lysandra just smiles and she lets out this little Mycenaean sea dragon huffle because she can't really laugh as a sea dragon. But this is the moment where Aelin knows that Lysandra's going to be okay. However, Aelin has so much guilt because a lot of this did fall on Lysandra. Obviously, she had 2 sea dragons to fight, whether or not they were adolescent. That was a lot of pressure to put on one person. But because of the little magic incident that Aelin had and the fact that she didn't really think about the fact that there would be implications of wearing a word key, Lysandra had to fight like half the battle herself. Aedion wants to give Aelin a piece of his mind, but he can clearly tell by her state that she's already giving herself a hard enough time, so he decides for now he's going to let her off the hook. We did win the battle, but obviously there is still a war going on out there, so everyone has to get back to business, and Aedion volunteers to stay by Lysandra's side until she heals enough to shift back into her human form. So he stays there for the rest of the day into the night until she's able to shift back into her human form, and then he carries her back to her inn so that she can sleep in her bed. Chapter 38, we're in Aelin's POV as she's thinking about a lot of Deanna's words. And then she also just has to kind of explain to Ralph why she imploded his ship, his favorite ship, his biggest ship, and then why she also kind of took a chunk of Skull's Bay with her. So Aelin and Rowan explain to Ralph what happened. Obviously, he is not amused and basically says he thinks that Aelin is just a young girl playing with some powers that are too big for her. Ralph uses this as an opportunity to share his own story, and it's a long story, but in summary, he says no better than a slave, and basically him, his sister, and his mother were barely making it by, and he was working on the crew for some men that he thought were really, really bad pirate lords. And one day he washed up on shore after a capsizing situation, and he saw this strange man who basically said he could grant him a wish. Ralph said that he wanted to become the best pirate lord out there, and he wanted to be the pirate lord to end all pirate lords, and he wanted to be the best that there was, and he didn't want to answer to anyone because he was just so good at what he did. And the man said that there would be a price, and Ralph was like, I don't have anything. So sure, he's like, I don't have anything to lose. But then shortly after he got his magic map on his hand that made him the pirate he is today, he heard news that his sister and his mother had passed away. So that was the price he had to pay. So he says, that was the price that I had to pay for my power. What's the price that you're going to have to pay? And Aelin doesn't really answer. She just leaves. But what Ralph said makes her think about Deanna's words, specifically the words, the queen who was promised. She does not like the sound of that. So she meets with Rowan privately to discuss what happened, and they quickly turn to the fact that the number one priority needs to be finding this lock, because now Brandon has told them they need to find the lock. Deanna has told them they need to find the lock. This is clearly very important. And they're both saying, like, no matter how many allies you get, or even how many word keys you get, like, it's all useless without the lock. So it's like, okay, dang, another thing to add to the list to do. And I'll remind you, Aelin keeps telling the reader silently, she's not saying it out loud to anyone, but she keeps mentioning how she's running out of time. She just needs more time. And when you feel like you're running out of time, the last thing you want to do is keep adding tasks to your to-do list. This also turns into Aelin and Rowan talking about how much they care about each other and how they don't want anything to happen to each other and how they're worried that something's going to happen to each other. And it's this really sweet, tender conversation that results in them saying, I love you for the first time. It's a very sweet, tender moment. And then they get jiggy with it. Moving on. Chapter 39. The next morning, Aelin and Rowan go to see Dorian, Aedion, and Lysandra because Lysandra is now awake. And she comes clean to them that the amulet of Orinth is holding a word key. She accidentally used the word key when she did her power, and that's kind of why everything went wrong. Then she pulls out the Eye of Elena and explains to Dorian how she's been using it to see their ancestors. Then she tells them about the lock and how basically Brandon and now Deanna have said that she absolutely needs it and it's a non-negotiable, so they are going to summon Elena and ask her about it. Aedion pulls out the books with all of the word marks in them, and so him and Aelin use them to make word marks on the ground, and then they summon Elena. Aelin wants to know a couple things from Elena. She wants to know why Deanna did what she did, what exactly this lock is that they need to find, what does the queen who was promised mean, and why in the world has Elena failed to mention that she and Gavin never actually killed Erewhon and that he's actually been in a magic-induced coma this entire time. As for Elena's responses to Aelin, she says that she insulted Deanna by forcing her out of her body before she wasn't ready, which honestly, like, too bad, shouldn't have been there in the first place. And Aelin basically says, like, okay, she can get in line, like, a lot of people want my neck right now, and Deanna's the least of my concerns, so we'll have to worry about Deanna later. Aelin then says she thought Aelin would have found the keys by now, and she did not expect things to go so far, so that is why Elena has withheld, like, key information from her, which is crazy if you ask me. And then she also says she never told her about the lock because she didn't think it was an option. So, let's learn a little bit about this lock. Elena used this lock to seal Erewhon into his tomb after they put him into this magically induced coma, and then she threw it into the ruins of the holy city in the marshlands. But some sort of natural disaster came through, I guess, and the city got sucked into some sort of sinkhole, and then it was flooded. So it's kind of like an underground city at this point. Basically, when the lock was forged, she was under the impression that the lock had one good use in it, and then it would just be like a hunk of metal that couldn't be used again. Elena's mother actually sacrificed her immortal life in exchange for the lock and became a human. And this was Mala Firebringer. Okay, so Aelin did not just inherit her firepower from Brandon, which would have been impressive because Brandon was known for his fire magic, but so was Mala Firebringer. So from both sides of her family tree are two of the strongest fire wielders in existence. But I'll remind you, this also means that Dorian is a descendant of Mala Firebringer because Elena married Gavin. So Dorian's a descendant of Gavin, right? So Aelin and Dorian are technically kind of related, and it's weird if you think about it too hard because they almost kind of dated in book 1, but they're like 15th cousins, so we try not to think about it. But all that to say, that means that both Dorian and Aelin are descendants of Mala Firebringer. And then Elena, who, because her body, I guess, is buried in Rifthold, the connection is weak for her to actually talk to them in Scold's Bay. So then she, like, disappears due to weak connection, I guess. So we have a new plan. Aelin and the crew are going to head to the Stone Marshes first thing tomorrow morning to find this lock. Rolf is going to take half of his fleet to round up the rest of the Mycenians and then head to Terrasen. And then some are going to stay at Skulls Bay, and then the rest are going to meet Aelin in Eelway, but not for battle. Aelin has something else up her sleeve. When does she not? So the next morning, Ralph gives Aelin vague coordinates for the lock, I guess because it's so far away, like his hand can only do so much. So he gives her coordinates for the lock, and then they part ways. We're going to flash forward 3 days into their journey. Dorian is on the deck when he sees a wyvern in the distance flying over the water, and there is an unconscious witch on top of it. Dorian knows exactly who this witch is in the moment and yells for all the men on board to stand down and not shoot at the wyvern. The wyvern is flying towards the boat as fast as possible, but clearly not with the intent to attack, but to land. And that is when none other than Manon Blackbeak falls off of Abraxos's back into the water. And so Manon's storyline now lines up with Aelin's. Now we're on chapter 40, and this is actually where part 2 of Empire of Storms comes into play, and the title of part 2 is Fireheart, which is what Aelin's mother called her, and now it's what Rowan calls her. So it's like a term of endearment specifically for her. Now we are going to check in on Elide and Lorcan because it's been a hot minute. They've been a part of this traveling circus now for a couple days, and Lorcan has been a hit, okay? Especially with the ladies, and the troop is loving it because he's bringing in lots of money for them. Their troop, however, is now traveling east, so Elide is going to have to break away from the group pretty soon to head north. So her and Lorcan are talking one night after their perspective shows in Elide's tent, and little side note, but Lorcan catches himself realizing that now that Elide is like well fed and taken care of herself, she's actually really, really pretty, and he hates himself for noticing it. But he does think that Elide's pretty beautiful. And right as he's snapping out of his trance that he should be having about how pretty she is, they hear screaming in the distance. Lorcan orders her to hide and goes to inspect the source of the screaming when he finds that 4 Ilken are wreaking havoc on this carnival. And remember, those are the freaky things that Elide and Lorcan fought in the woods when they first actually met. So they're here because they are hunting Elide, and they will not hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. So Lorcan steps forward, and 2 other people, I guess, from the traveling group who also know how to operate swords. Lorcan isn't going to question it. He's just happy to have some help, and he informs them that the only way to kill an Ilken is to cut off their head. So they approach them when the Ilken ask if they have seen Elide Lorcan. She is a dark-haired woman with a limp, and they will pay handsomely to the one who turns her over. Obviously, we knew they were looking for Elide, but the crazy thing about this is that up until this point, Lorcan has thought that he is with Marion, a little nobody. This is where he learns that Elide is actually the prized possession of the right-hand man of Erewhon. So he has quite literally been helping and aiding someone who could very well be the death of him because she is quite literally being hunted down. So he's a little upset about that, but he just tells the Ilken in the moment, sorry, don't know who you're talking about, she's not here. They say that it's a shame because they would have just taken her and left, but now they've traveled so far and they're a little hungry, so they attack. Chapter 41 in Elide's POV is she is hiding in a wagon, and she knows eventually she's going to have to make a run for it because she can't rely on Lorcan to just keep saving her butt with his combat skills. So she decides at some point when it starts to get quiet that it's now or never. She needs to make a run for it, but the costume that she's wearing, she's supposed to be like a gypsy fortune teller, gets stuck on the wagon, so she's literally stuck. And then someone approaches her and she freaks out because she thinks that this is the end, but it's just Lorcan. And he's like, I already killed the 4 wyvern, but good to know that you would have gotten so far if I didn't succeed. And then he also, instead of helping her get unstuck, just fights with her about the fact that she's been hiding her identity and how that kind of changes a lot of things because she's a lot more dangerous. There's a big bounty on her head, and she should have just been straightforward in the first place. And then he says, while we're on the topic of keeping secrets, what's the thing you've been hiding from me? Remember, she has the stone that Kaltain gave her that she's been hiding from him. So she just says it's a gift for Selena Sardothian from the woman who sacrificed her life, Kaltain, to get her out of Morath. Lorcan asks to see exactly what this gift is, but Elide refuses, which good on her. During this conversation, Elide actually does come clean about a lot of things, not just her identity, but how her mother helped Aelin get away and died in the process, how her uncle betrayed her father, then took her in as a ward, and how her ankle ended up the way it did, and the abuse that she endured at Morath. And this is also why she wants to go to Terrasen to serve Aelin in any way that's useful. She's like, I don't care if I have to be Aelin's maid. Like, I just want to be useful. Lorcan returns the sentiment of opening up, basically saying that he is one of the cadre that serve Maeve, and he's actively defying her for her best interest, although she disagrees. Despite telling her this, it's good if Elide pretends like she doesn't know this information, because if Lorcan gets found by Maeve and Maeve is wondering who Elide is, it would be best if Elide denied ever knowing who Lorcan actually was. So they seem to have come to a new understanding of each other. Basically, they both have no friends, no family, and they have nothing to lose except for to accomplish their one mission. So they agree to travel east for a few more days with their circus, and then they're going to part ways and complete their respective missions. So we were mad at each other, but now we're good. And we're finally gonna see like an actual continuation of their story that doesn't take place at the circus. All right, guys, that is the end of part 11 of the entire Tandem Read, even though we just read Empire of Storms today. And we're actually going to be reading just Empire of Storms for part 12 as well. I promise we'll get back to Tower of Dawn in part 13. But for now, we are enjoying our time learning more what's happening with Aelin and her crew, Manon, Elide and Lorcan. Like, there is so much going on here. So we will continue their story in part 12. If you are not caught up yet, you absolutely should get caught up in this playlist right here, and you should subscribe so you get notified whenever I post a fun new bookish video or entire plot episode.